Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Street Apologists Live. I am your host, Vocab Malone. Today's the day after Christmas here in the United States, Phoenix, Arizona, specifically Thursday, December 26, 2019. A little bit late. It's all Abu's fault. Yes, I have a guest on tonight, and that's why I hate having guests. They just totally ruin everything. But in all seriousness, he's a fellow apologist and great brother. And on Street Apologists Live, you know what we do. We serve the underserved, and we look into the overlooked. Tonight, I think we are doing that in a manner of speaking as we give a theological analysis review of the Rise of Skywalker, the latest Star Wars movie. It'll be a very interesting conversation, and then halfway through we'll switch and we will play Muhammad's Boom Boom Room with Darth Vader, and we will give behind-the-scenes context on that, Abu being an expert on Islam, you know, and then also we got myself, who's a Star Wars nerd and helped write the script and acted in it. So with all that being said, let me go ahead and bring my face up here. 3, 2, 1, boom. What up, party people in the place to be? If you look real hard on the bookshelf behind me, you gotta look really, really hard. You see it's outlined in green. If you notice, you can see in the lit section a black figure. Look very closely. That is Kylo Ren. And if you look, he's a little bit whited out or whatever, blurred out, I don't know. There is a First Order. Was it called the First Order? I think it's called the First Order. Stormtrooper. He's the one with that riot gear who yelled, "Traitor!" in The Force Awakens, if you saw that. So anyways, you can kind of see that over that shoulder. And then actually, if you look right beside this earphone, you'll see a poster of BB-8 my homie got me. It's actually like a painting or whatever. And that's on the side of the bookcase. Then if you look over there, you'll see Yoda. I'm tickling him. That's him. Anyways, Dr. Funny says he doesn't want any spoilers. We'll probably have a few spoilers, so I understand. But check this out then. Dr. Funny, come back in about 40 minutes, maybe 35 minutes, by God's grace. And then we're going to be doing the Boom Boom Room, so it will no longer be Rise of Skywalker discussion. All right, so with that, welcome to Street Apologist, my man, Abu Kammer. How you doing, bro?
I'm doing very good. Calling in from New York. And good evening to everybody. A little bit earlier out there in Arizona, though. Huh?
Yeah, a little bit earlier. Now, everybody, hit me a 1 if you can hear Abu, and if you can hear him without any echo. That's what I want to make sure. That's what I want to make sure is going on, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear Abu? And also, can you hear him without any echo? That's what I'm hoping. All right, good. It looks like people can hear you. So Abu is a member of the SHIELD Squad. Abu is the man that I described to Dr. Michael Brown as the greatest living historian of One West Hebrew Israelites. Not only that, Sam Shamoon and David Wood know him rather well because he also does a lot of stuff dealing with Islam. And so he's kind of right up the alley, and he's a little bit nerdy, you know what I mean? And so he's got some interesting takes on some of these movies. So we're going to talk about them briefly and then flip over into this. So I think it'll be a fun show. It's apologetics, worldview analysis, and I think you'll enjoy it. So, Abu, you just saw The Rise of Skywalker, what was it, 2 days ago?
Yes, indeed. Yep, on the 24th, I think it was. Yeah, on day before Christmas.
All right, so do you think it matters, should, say, for example, for a Christian, is it relevant in any way, whether they see the new Star Wars trilogy? You know, should they not? Should they? Is there a way we could justify it? Why do you want to see it, for example?
Oh, I would have to struggle mightily to come up with a Christian reason to see it. I saw it strictly as a fan. I mean, I became a fan of Star Wars before I became a Christian, so maybe it's a vestige of my pagan past. But what I would say is that maybe the only relevance to the Christian worldview would be that it becomes a tool for connecting with the larger culture. You know, you learn the cultural references. But no, there's no Christian reason for seeing it. I just wanted to see it because I was afraid.
Well, that's good. That's honest and true and accurate. And, you know, It's like if there's something's going on in the larger culture and you're inclined to it in some way, and it's not overtly wicked where it's going to destroy your Christian walk, I think that kind of thing's all good. If there's something going on in the culture that really we just can't mess around with, there's really no way to touch it without totally being sullied. We got to stay away from those as far as, looking all up into it. Like certain movies might be popular, but doesn't mean we can really talk about those, promote those certain TV series. It's kind of like, eh. And then it's not like we need to know every pop culture trend, but I think there might be a nexus or a synergy, or I don't know what I'm trying to say, but a sweet spot for different individuals where it's something they're interested in, they're inclined to it, it's not going to sully them, and then I think it makes sense for them to discuss it in a theological manner. Someone asks, Vocab, if you were in Star Wars, which side would you choose? I'll let Abu answer first. Which side, and more specifically, Abu, what character would you choose?
Am I choosing this for myself or for you?
You do it for yourself, bro, man. I don't want you making my life decisions.
No, I mean, I wasn't prepared for that question. I guess for myself, I don't know. Oh man, of course, every man wants to be the hero, but at this point, I don't know. I guess since just because it's so fresh in my mind, maybe Luke, not because he's the hero, but because of all the inner conflict. I think that's something I really appreciated in the previous film. I know the Last Jedi was much reviled, but for me, it really resonated, the sort of inner conflict and the doubts that he had to deal with, because I think before someone becomes a Christian, they sort of go through that process of just uncertainty, and
Yeah.
that's why that resonated with me. So maybe that, the growing pains of life.
So Abu would choose Luke. Luke is my idealistic hero in a lot of ways, and that's why I hated a lot of aspects of the previous film, which is The Last Jedi, because Rian Johnson took Luke, who's ever full of hope, always optimistic, sees the best. I mean, he has his fits of depression in his own way. I'm not saying, he can't be melancholy, but he's, for example, always trying to find a way to find redemption for his father, for example. He will try to help his friends regardless of what it looks like might happen out of proper loyalty and love to them, and he's able to even really have forgiveness in his heart. So I feel all that. But when I zoom it to the whole series, I end up liking Obi-Wan Kenobi. Probably I end up saying he's my favorite Jedi. He's the Jedi I'm most interested in learning about more and seeing all the kind of stuff he did, because he's just ever dependable, ever faithful. And let me put this out here real quick. So you can see the answer to you asking the question. We would both choose the light side. Not to say there aren't cool parts of the dark side, because we're all sinners, right? But check this out. I blame George Lucas, as much as I like him, for the lies that Obi-Wan had to tell, because I've read the backstory of this, and when Obi-Wan basically says that to Luke, hey, Darth Vader murdered your father, and then later on he does Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, he does a certain point of view about truth. I feel like that, well, from what I know in the background, that's George Lucas retconning the story of Luke, Vader, and Obi-Wan is basically the fall guy in the script. Because if you really look, Obi-Wan's character is not like that, to not tell the truth. He's always direct and straightforward and honest with Anakin and everybody he deals with. So I love George Lucas. I wish he would become a Christian, but I blame Obi-Wan's lies on George Lucas. Anyways, Obi-Wan to me is the man.
That's actually fascinating. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's totally true. I've read about this stuff. It's funny. We haven't even talked about this, but so Benjamin says, can't wait for the new Kenobi series. Yes, some people are going to be mad because Disney's a wicked, evil empire, just like the Empire in Star Wars. We know that, and here we are, end up having to promote this evil empire because we're talking about Star Wars stuff. Hey, George Lucas sold them, right? What am I supposed to do? So, anyways, with that being said, somebody says, can't wait for the new Kenobi series. They got, what's the Scottish guy's name? Ewan McGregor, to sign on for a TV show that's going to be on, I guess, Disney Plus, a Kenobi TV series. And the way they've done The Mandalorian is so almost flawless in my little head. and in my little heart that if they do Kenobi the way they've done The Mandalorian, I'm going to forgive a lot of the mistakes of this stupid Rise of Skywalker. That's what I'm saying. And then we got one more person. I'm gonna let you comment, Abu, because I want to hear what you have to say about that. I don't know if you knew about this. Nuxa says, though I agree with you, vocab. Obi-Wan had a good sense of humor and persevered in pursuing what's right, like you. Well, thank you. Oh gosh, shucks. No, but what you said, Nuxa, is exactly right. Let me give you one quick example of why Obi-Wan to me is just the man. If you know the Star Wars A New Hope 1977 trilogy, when he first comes and Luke is fainted because of his dealings with the Sand People, R2's hiding and C-3PO's in pieces. Obi-Wan comes through and he's checking Luke's pulse or whatever, and then he hears the sound of the droid and he pulls back his hood and he goes, "Oh, hello there." The very first line we hear from this, wise old battle-hardened wizard is a charming hello there to a droid. And the way he does it, I love. But that's not all. In Revenge of the Sith, Obi-Wan looks down on a massive droid army headed by Count Dooku when he's inside of their hangar. And General Grievous, did I say Count Dooku? I meant to say General Grievous. General Grievous is known as a robotic cyborg Jedi killer alien guy. Obi-Wan decides to just drop down in the middle of them. And he drops down in the middle and he looks around and he goes, "Hello there." So I just love that, that he did that. So Obi-Wan, Abu, your turn to comment before we get into our review.
I actually had no idea the show was coming out. I don't have Disney Plus, but people are raving about The Mandalorian, so they've certainly captured my interest. I also have to say that I think in this case I might be much more forgiving to the new films than you are, and maybe that'll come out as we move on.
You are, but I wonder if you're at heart less of a fan than me, and that's why you're more forgiving.
You know what it is? Because when episode 1 came out, it felt so disappointing, and I concluded that the part of the problem was I went in with very high expectations. Mm-hmm. From then on, I've gone into every subsequent Star Wars film with extremely low expectations, and that way you can't be disappointed. If you tell yourself it's going to be garbage, you can't be disappointed. And almost more often than not, I'm almost always pleasantly surprised. It's better than expected.
Yeah,
it's the attitude we bring to the table. Sorry.
Yeah, I do think that's part of it, man. You kind of basically lower expectations, and you'll be all right when it comes to these. At the end of the day, you got to kind of realize, hey, man, these are just fictional movies, and I can't let them hurt my feelings just because they're ruining my childhood.
But I think that's also the issue, is our childhoods and bring in a certain semblance of nostalgia, which makes us more forgiving to the older films. Like I think we discussed this offline, that both of us saw Empire Strikes Back at roughly 3 years old. That was the first movie I saw. If I'm not mistaken, that was the first movie you saw. I love that film, but when I'm honest with myself, if I'm going to be honest with myself, I don't believe that a man in his 40s who's never seen any Star Wars film can watch The Empire Strikes Back and walk away. Or I certainly don't think that there's a high probability that he'll conclude that it was a great film,
See, the critics of the time, though, loved Empire Strikes Back. It wasn't panned, it was lauded. So I know what you're saying, but if you go back and read the reviews of Empire Strikes Back at that time, from what I've seen, it was like, they had a lot good to say about it. Same thing with the first Star Wars. Jedi is where I think, from what I've read historically of the reviews, the first time where some of the critics sort of bared their teeth. Obviously, there's always critics who didn't understand any of this, what was going on, and so you can find those. Those are some pretty funny reviews. But if you look, you get the sense of people are like, wow, this is some awesome blockbuster, filmmaking. But at the same time, I know what you're saying, but, Okay, so here we are. We're in the new trilogy. They've already done the original ones, which mainly are the 80s, the original 3. And now then in the early 2000s, or late 90s, you have the prequel trilogy that George Lucas was at the helm of, which have in some ways not aged well, but a lot of people now, after the Disney trilogy, like the prequels better than they did before. This is a common theme I'm hearing among the kind of Star Wars fandom. Now here we are, the Disney J.J. Abrams / Ryan Johnson later trilogy is done. So We start with The Force Awakens. It seemed like it was basically a love letter to the nostalgia of the original trilogy, especially to A New Hope. Quick thoughts on The Force Awakens, which came out in, I guess, 2015.
It didn't strike me as particularly memorable. It just didn't. Yeah, I don't know. I remember, see, one of the things I do, I avoid all the spoilers and critics' reviews and stuff like that going into a film, so I try to go in as blind as possible. And I think what happened with that one is I was looking forward to seeing a new movie with Luke Skywalker and seeing what he does, and because I was looking forward to that so much, that first film, he's essentially not in it until the last few seconds of the film. And I remember, for some reason, because I guess I had an emotional investment in seeing him, the portions which didn't have him didn't resonate with me, I guess. I don't know.
Which is pretty much the whole movie. I mean, in that movie, basically, Luke is the Wizard of Oz. They're going to see him. They're off to see the wizard. They find him at the end. But even the Wizard of Oz got more screen time, than Luke did at the end of The Force Awakens. Yeah, The Force Awakens doesn't have a lot to it, but they did some things good. Some people think it was a decent setup. Not perfect, Big criticisms are Rey is what's called a Mary Sue. Are you familiar with that term? You ever heard that?
I'm not familiar with it.
Mary Sue is a character who is good at everything they try right away. It's kind of an easy plot device. Rey is regardless of how people try to defend it, now that it's known her lineage, Rey is clearly a Mary Sue in every way. And,
to the point of absurdity, yeah.
Yes, and the reason why that bothers people, for a few reasons. One is people know real life's not like that. Two is part of the heroic struggle is the struggle itself. And it kind of looks like you have this idea that Rey maybe struggled in her past, but once we see her, she's just acing everything. And it's kind of like, it feels very cheap. It feels very cheap, like, okay, Mary Sue. Yeah, it's called a Mary Sue. And the other gaming nerd term I've picked up from watching reviews is that she's OP. That's called overpowered, meaning it's an unfair unbalance, her versus basically everybody else in this. You know what I'm saying? Hey, shout out to my man BK Apologist. That's Alfredo Valentin. I know he's a Star Wars fan himself, and he right now is he's giving love to the Cyber City Apologetics Conference. Hey, BK Apologist, if you have time to stop by this live stream for maybe 10 minutes, I know you're a Star Wars nerd. It'd be dope to get you on. You're going to have to download Skype, give me your Skype, and then my Skype is at Vocab Malone. And maybe in 5 or 10 minutes, if you're down, we could bring you on, bro, if you're interested. All right, so continuing on. So that's The Force Awakens. It introduced Kylo Ren, which he's a sort of emo Vader. But nonetheless, people still like him because he has a cool... I see the kids. The kids like him. He has a cool, different lightsaber. And they kind of like his look, sort of like this millennial emo guy, and it has elements of Darth Vader in it, but to me, I'm like, hey, this guy's way too emo for my taste, right? But the kids like him. I see it. I see that they love BB-8, and I think BB-8's legit. BB-8's a legit enough sort of replacement for R2. The other folks, Finn kind of all three movies runs around yelling a lot, saying Rey, Chewie, Poe. That's kind of Finn's character. They could have done something very interesting with Finn, being that he's an ex-stormtrooper, but then they didn't do too much. But apparently, Abu remembers nothing about Force Awakens, unless you remembered something else by my reenactments, and then we'll go to the second movie.
No, I'm looking forward to discussing the second, because I think the second film is where we have our most pronounced disagreements.
I strongly dislike The Last Jedi. It seemed like it was written by somebody who was an iconoclast in the Star Wars universe. An iconoclast, Abu, I would describe, maybe you have a different way you describe it, as in the general term, it's from a Greek term, meaning one who smashes images or takes down images or something like that. And then actually has historical meaning or development where the Protestants and sometimes drunk people in some of these towns would have, because these became parties. I've looked into this. There was legitimate iconoclasts who, by principle, wanted to rid their Protestant churches of all vestiges of Rome, and so they would smash the statues, they would deface the paintings. But sometimes you would actually get just random drunk people who were interested in this because that was like the coolest thing going on, and so they would join in. So some of the iconoclastic parties got way out of hand. So I felt like The Last Jedi was done by an iconoclast. Oh, you think Luke is great? Guess what? I'm gonna make him depressed, cowardly, and pessimistic, and that's your Luke now. Oh, you thought the Jedi text and the wisdom of the ancients mattered? I'm going to tell you it doesn't matter at all. It matters not. Page turners were they? You know, that whole thing. I'm going to take that down there. Oh, you thought that Force ghosts weren't able to do anything? You thought that was part of the rules of the Force Star Wars universe? I'm going to have Luke call down lightning from heaven like the sons of Zebedee wanted to against the town.
Yoda.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Yoda. Sorry, I'm getting too excited. I'm going to have Yoda call down Force lightning, in a storm and blow up the special tree and all this kind of stuff. Oh, you thought, the list goes on and on, right? You thought lightsabers were important? I'm going to have Luke just toss it over his shoulder like, hey, yesterday's trash. You know what I'm saying? So that's what I see. Anyways, you and then, of course, you've got Leia, Princess Mary Poppins Leia, flying through space in The Last Jedi. And then you have Purple Hair General, who tells no one her plan, even though it could be a decent plan, but wants to keep it a secret just because she's like that, I guess. So I'm just like, what are you doing with this movie? And you have this awesome throne room scene, which should have been at the end of the movie, and it changes nothing except now a different guy's in charge. You built this other guy up, Snoke, and just kill him off. What are you people doing? This doesn't seem like a continuation of anything Star Wars or The Force Awakens. But Abu thinks it's the greatest thing. Go ahead and tell us why.
Well, I like the parts with Luke specifically, and when I know that's one of your real sticking points, the rest of the film, not so much for me. But the parts with Luke is especially what I like. You yourself very eloquently put it earlier in the show that the heroic struggle, the best part of the heroic struggle is the struggle itself, right? And maybe I'm slightly off with my paraphrase there, but I think that sort of captures it with what was going on with Luke. Forgive this segue, but a film that I absolutely love is the film The Messenger, which is Luc Besson's film about Joan of Arc. And the reason I'm citing that now as relevant is because in that film, in the beginning, she receives all these signs that seem within the film to be just very clear confirmations of her mission, this sort of mission from God. And then when she's under arrest and she's in prison, she meets with some sort of figure. It might be an angel, it might be God, it's not clear. And this figure begins to question her on all the signs and just fills her with doubt that suddenly all what seem like clear signs just aren't clear signs at all. And because I love that film, that resonated with me with Luke, that this longtime Jedi Master is now going through his own internal struggle, his own doubt. And another thing that resonated with me, a line that came to me when I was watching that second film, was the second film of the prequels, where Anakin is alone with I forget the name of the queen, Amidala, I believe it is, Natalie Portman's character. Mm-hmm. So they get into a conversation about love, and she asks, "Was a Jedi allowed to love?" Mm-hmm. And he says,
"Attachment is forbidden."
Yes, attachment is forbidden, and then he says, "Possession is forbidden." That came to mind while watching the sort of struggle with inside of Luke, and then also seeing the situation where Yoda apparently destroys that sort of tree temple and the sacred text. Apparently, emphasis on apparently, because I learned from you later on, I missed it the first time I saw it, that the texts survive. They wind up in a drawer on the ship. Uh-huh. And I wound up seeing that. I watched it on Netflix before catching the latest film on Tuesday.
Rey is a scavenger, and apparently she scavenged.
Apparently. But for me, the interesting question is, was Yoda aware of the fact that they were no longer there? And I think that's an interesting question, because this is something that I think it comes up in Buddhism, and to a lesser extent, it comes up in Christianity. Buddhism has this whole thing about how people need to sort of escape their attachments, step away from their attachments. And yet now Buddhism has all these, archaeological sites and heritage sites and, ancient scrolls of its own. And naturally people become attached to those things. So you think about back to, 2001 when the Taliban blew up these 1,000-plus-year-old Buddhist statues in Bamiyan in Afghanistan. And the question then becomes, like, if you're a Buddhist and you're sad about that, were you attached to those statues? And there's sort of a thing like that in Christianity. Like, aren't we supposed to be somewhat separated from this world? But I think a lot of us fall in love with our churches and our books and our buildings and our heritage sites and so on down the line, where we even lament the loss of such things. And so it was interesting to see that a Jedi who's supposed to be free of attachments is nonetheless very attached to this heritage site, attached to these books. And you have Yoda sort of first off, Luke is willing to destroy them, but then he hesitates at the last moment, and then Yoda creates this impression that what he was unwilling to do has happened after all. The tree is destroyed, this veritable ancient temple is destroyed, and the texts are lost, and it's almost forcing a lesson about attachment onto him.
Forcing. I see what you did there.
Yeah, well, no. But so that resonated with me a lot. I mean, I liked seeing that, and I liked seeing the doubt, the cynicism in Luke,
All right, well, we'll just leave it there. Apparently, Abu is also an iconoclast.
Well, I was going to say, quick note on iconoclasm. There's something else that I like about this is that I think as religion has receded from the public sphere, the desire for people to have heroes is still there. So, but rather than look to religious heroes, look to biblical figures or something of that, what the public looks to is now they go for movie heroes or sports athletes and stuff like that. So there is a certain amusement that I feel when a secular hero is knocked down a few pegs as well.
And so what you're saying is you like when someone who's not based in the scripture, who's not gospel, who's not Jesus, basically, right? Yeah. You like when in some way, whatever hero status or admiration they've been given, you like when they, in a sense, fall or are brought down in people's eyes because you think it could hypothetically drive people back to where they should be more?
I don't know if it'll drive them back, but it's still, I don't know. I find a small amount of pleasure in that. Your space age, your flawless space age Buddhist monk is actually riddled with doubt and cynicism and so on down the line, and is still going through a learning process, as are we all.
Well, so then what's it gonna do? What's it gonna do with if you're glad when it happens, what do you think it's gonna? What's it gonna do?
Oh, I certainly can't guarantee that it'll push people back to Christianity, but nor am I even confident that it would do that. I don't know. I still like it's the first step.
I guess you've taken your first step into a larger world. I guess they shot the scenes on that temple island that Luke was being a hermit at. It's some kind of used to be a place populated by Irish monks, is my understanding. And I guess there's rock crosses all over that island. And of course, they couldn't have that, so they had to shoot at all these angles where the crosses would blend in with the rest of the rocks. But I guess if you look close enough, if you know how to look, there's still crosses littered throughout that island because the monks put so many rock crosses up there.
That's
in that island he was actually
at.
Yeah, because it's an Irish island or something like that. Yes, indeed. Shout out to Roxby for the super chat. Thank you. Wow, we've got some hardcore fans in here because I didn't think anybody was going to know about this. This is an interesting concept in itself, and now we're going to switch over to the Rise of Skywalker. But I'm going to put this comment on the screen because it's nerd level expert. Shady Oak Ministries asks, "Did you get to the canonization of Revan and Tenebras?" Wow. So Darth Revan is an ancient Sith, right? And apparently Disney now has confirmed, in I think I forget what's one of the books or something, that he's canon, and that's a big deal for the that's a big deal for like the Star Wars community. What's canon and what's not, even though it's like this kind of relatively arbitrary decision by people at Disney, like Kathleen Kennedy. So it's kind of a fascinating thing that people are so concerned about it. But isn't it interesting? In Star Wars, what is canon is a massive, massive question that people are always talking about. And, Shady Oak Ministries is like, hey, did you get to that? Where we're not really talking about tonight. But don't you think that's interesting, the concept of canon? And, how was that sort of determined? Obviously there's some parallels within Christian church history, right?
Absolutely. And even the disputes about such. But yes.
Yeah, so Shady Oak Ministries obviously knows what they're talking about. It was the third and fourth company of the Sith Troopers. They were named after Revan and Tenebras. So, guys, I see people were saying their names are canonized in the visual dictionary. Is it a newer visual dictionary than this one? Because this one's relatively newer. I actually just got this for my kids this Christmas. Let me see, though. I don't think it has... So it ends at Last Jedi. So are you guys talking about a newer, perhaps? Maybe you guys are... Because I could tell some of the people in the live chat know a little bit more about this than actually us. Let me know what it is. Is it something that's been published, or is it different than that one I have? Anyways, let me know. But again, shout out to Roxby and Merry Christmas to everybody and all that. All right. So now that's enough backstory. Rise of Skywalker. My short version is it's a lovable retcon train wreck. That was about as good as it could be under the current circumstances. Retcon is retroactive. What's it stand for? Doesn't it stand for retroactive? Retroactive continuity. That's what it stands for. Sorry. Retcon, I guess, is retroactive continuity. Basically, where you have ad hoc explanations for things, or you try to fix things after the fact. You know what I mean? That type of thing. And I feel like there was a lot of that going on because J.J. Abrams was partially trying to fix the mistakes of The Last Jedi, I think. And it was a train wreck. What's really the main plot of the movie? And what's the direction and where's the character arcs? It's minimal. Did I hate it, though? No, I did not hate it. Because I hated The Last Jedi. But even that, if I could find redeeming qualities in. And so I like this. But did I love it? And is this something I would tell someone, hey, Star Wars is an awesome property? Would I tell them to watch The Rise of Skywalker first? Certainly not. Unless they just wanted to be wowed and they really had no brain. Because it's a little bit mindless. It's a little bit mindless, in my opinion. You have to kind of turn off your mind and stop asking questions and just say, I'm going to go enjoy parts of this. Because the acting is good. I think people are doing good. The script is okay. The action's pretty dope. It has some creative elements for sure. So I would describe it again as a lovable retcon train wreck. What about you, Abu?
Yeah, I think that's fair insofar that you have to go in with a light heart if you expect to enjoy it. Don't go in expecting Citizen Kane, of course, or something like that. But I don't know. Retroactive continuity, I like that. No, I enjoyed it. I actually enjoyed it a lot. I found it perplexing and difficult to understand at times. I honestly wanted to see it a second time, but I guess I have to wait for it to appear somewhere like on cable or something because I have a certain reluctance to plunk down that much money. But yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I could get into what resonated with me, I guess, but
okay. Spoiler time. Spoilers, everybody.
Yes, look away.
Right. So far, I don't think we've given away any spoilers as far as the Rise of Skywalker is concerned. We really have not. Everything we've talked about for them is before, and we've only mentioned things in vague generalities. Now, we will spoil parts because I want to hear Abu say what he thinks resonated. So now we are in spoiler territory. So look away if you can't handle that. All right. So go ahead, my man. What resonated with you?
Well, a little secret about me, a game that I like to play with a lot of films is to sort of look for a Christian spin in every film. And I do this with just about every film, everything from World War Z to Elysium to any film that just doesn't seem that Christian. I nonetheless try to find the Christian elements. And, because... Well, I should be careful, and I should say that, if the parallels that I'm going to mention, if we take them too far, they're going to quickly, arrive at points which contradict, the classical Christian faith. But, I do believe that the Christian faith is written into creation itself. It's written into men's hearts, and therefore, even when men are contradicting the Christian faith, they can't help but affirm elements of it.
Right,
we're going to be talking about.
So almost to tell a good story, you've got to tell something that kind of starts to look like a good gospel story. I've heard people or at least phrase it that way.
Yeah, or just have elements of it. Later on we'll probably be discussing something having to do with Islam, and I think that's sort of the swirl that we experience with Islam. If we're honest, at least Orthodox Islam at certain points clearly contradicts the Christian faith, but then has other parts which are clearly pretty similar. But anyway, getting back to the film in terms of.
Real quick, that's important what you're saying. I wanted to talk with you about that. That's a idea and the thought of C.S. Lewis. Have you seen those quotes where he says kind of similar to what you're saying?
Mm-hmm. About myth and stuff like that, and about Christian truth and how they overlap. Yeah.
Can you elaborate?
Tolkien, apparently. Oh, I can't elaborate on it now. I'd have to grab some of my Joseph Pierce books to find the right words to discuss that. But yeah, apparently Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien were into this idea, the idea of mythology, good mythology, overlapping with Christian truth, and even ancient myths of so-called pagans, right up until medieval myths and the sort of myths or the fantasies that Tolkien and C.S. Lewis were writing, that they were consciously trying to put something that was smuggling in Christianity, but they also argued that even ancient myths, while not conscious, sort of paralleled the Christian faith in a number of ways for various reasons. I have a lot to say on that because I'm a proponent of the concept of the Prisca theologia. But anyway,
Bresca, what is that? Because
the
I know Justin Martyr might have said some things that could be interpreted in that light, but what's the last thing you just said? I'm not familiar with that term.
Theologia. Prisca theologia is sort of the concept of like the almost like how Islam has a concept like this. They'll talk about your fitrah, but they'll also talk about how Islam existed, right back to Adam. And Augustine talks about that, not Islam, obviously. Augustine says that what's now called the Christian faith has always existed in certain forms. And this becomes an explanation for why other systems, other belief systems, have certain elements that seem to parallel the Christian faith. I mean, actually, since we're so close to Christmas, I'll give an analogy for that. In Matthew 2, you have the Magi, the wise men, the Majus, as I like to say. They were able to read a reference to Christ's birth by looking into the heavens. And what that seems to say is that the elements of the Christian faith are written into creation, and some are able to read it, even if only read it vaguely. And therefore, I think, and ancient writers have taken this position, like Justin Martyr, like Augustine, that not so much reading the heavens, but that this ability to get a vague sense of the Christian faith allowed not only Jews, but even non-Jews to come up with this mix of foreshadowings of Christian truth and then all sorts of accretions and falsehoods, and that this sort of the reality of the many worldviews that existed before and when Christianity came onto the scene formally.
Fascinating. Zachary Coddington puts it this way in the live chat. I'll put the comment on the screen. Says, when things resonate with truth, they resonate most deeply. I think that's a good way to put it. You know what I mean? For example,
it's beautifully put.
Unless you have like legitimate evil, unless you have legitimate good, unless you have actions that have consequences that matter in some way, unless you have some kind of transcendent right and wrong, unless you have good, firm biblical concepts essentially rooted in the character of God, like sacrifice, unless you have those in there, you don't have a good story. You know what I mean? You don't have anything that matters. You don't have anything that makes sense to invest in. You don't have anything to admire. And I do think that that's part of what is something aesthetically and morally and emotionally makes it appealing, beautiful, is that it's true. I think that's a big component of that. And, I like that. And Zachary Connington, am I wrong? Do you have a Jedi Temple Guard as your profile avatar? The guys with the yellow-orange lightsabers? I'm almost positive Zachary Connington has a Jedi Temple Guard as his profile. If so, we have some legitimate hardcore Star Warriors up in here. Because that anybody that has a Jedi Temple Guard is just taking it there, unless you did it just specifically for this. All right, so with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about the Rise of Skywalker in more specifics. What are the parts that resonated with you the most? What did you like the most, Abu?
What stood out for me, and I like that this gentleman that you just quoted said that when something parallels the truth, it resonates most. I think that's really what it is. The film was somewhat of a blur for me, but I remember at the end I was sitting there, and the first thought that I had, I was thinking to myself, so wait, the ultimate evil in the universe is defeated with the help of essentially a cruciform, the person who triumphs over evil via the help of that veritable cross, admittedly it's more like St. Andrew's cross, is then subsequently saved from death by the death of a man whose name might loosely be translated only son. Ben is son in Hebrew and Solo is only in Latin. Isn't that interesting?
Adam Driver, I think is part Jewish, so
yeah. Oh yeah.
And I know
so as well.
And I know J.J. Abrams is. So
yeah.
I don't know if you guys caught it. Abu just said that I find this fascinating that he thinks in these terms. I think I'm all good with it because I like Now the question is, do they mean these parallels, this and that? That's a different question. But to be
Oh
able to
no, I
see
definitely think they
things,
don't. I
yeah,
think they can't escape it. I think even people who hate,
right.
who despise Christianity, can't help but at times parallel it unwittingly. I'm sorry, continue though.
No, that's good. That's good. I think that's what we're kind of saying here. I hope people understand that there's a sort of a subtle or a nuanced distinction that we are making. Now, with that being said, so at the end of the movie, we already said there's going to be spoilers. Palpatine, the Emperor, is resurrected. So this makes him, by the way, the bad guy at literally all three climax moments of all three trilogies. At each one at the end, he's the bad guy. He's Darth Sidious in the
Hmm.
prequels. He's the Emperor, controlling Vader. And now here we go again. So all three, he's the bad guy, right? And so that's interesting in itself. It's almost like, you know, it's always Satan, you know what I'm saying?
Mm.
So here we've got him at the end of each one, and we've got a situation where Rey and Kylo Ren are fighting him at this point, and then what happens? Kylo is out. Rey has a lightsaber, and you're saying St. Andrew's Cross because while the Emperor is shooting his Force lightning, she does this, and I'm making the sign so
Hmm.
everybody can see, and you're saying that's how this ultimate evil in the universe was stopped, and that's what you're also saying, that notice it was via the sacrifice of Ben Solo, and Ben, bin, and not ben, but the sound is the same, is only is son in Hebrew, and Solo is alone, so the idea of only son. So do that one more time again, because I don't think everybody caught that. You got to break it down, bro. Do it slow
So
for
so
me.
just treating Rey as sort of a standard human, right? The standard human defeats the ultimate evil in the universe with the help of a cruciform, with essentially a cross, right? And then this person who triumphs over the ultimate evil via the help of that veritable cross is herself saved from death by the death of a man whose name might loosely be translated only son. So, the only son defeats death with his own death and saves this person who triumphs via the cross, with his own death.
Very, very
And then,
interesting, man.
sorry, yep,
Now, and then
it's
what?
intriguing. No, no, no. Forgive me. I was going to take a bit of a Roman turn. Or not Roman,
Well,
Orthodox turn. I was also amused that for our Orthodox friends, our Greek Orthodox friends, who and maybe our Roman Catholic friends as well, that then later on it's revealed that only son is assumed bodily into the next realm, but not only him, so too his mother is also bodily assumed into this whatever that next realm is. August 15th is bodily assumption. Moving on.
yeah, well, I mean,
Too
just
Orthodox.
like
All right, too Orthodox. All right.
so. By that, we're saying that they in a sense exist after death. But I don't know. Force ghosts. Can you count that bodily?
No, 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 definitely not. That would be something else. That's yeah. I don't know what I would
It's
have
more
to.
like
I'd need some time.
it's more like the Greek concept of the immortality of the soul. I think. Don't you
Absolutely.
don't you think? Because there's certain Greeks, not all everybody, but certain Greeks of the time who did believe in the immortality of the soul, and so there was examples of I believe with Apollonarius, the guy that sometimes people try to say Apollonarius of Tiana. What was his name? You know what I'm talking about? He came after Jesus and seemed to be some kind of Greco-Roman like ripoff, and sometimes people try to say that that's the inspiration for Jesus, even though he came way later. But anyways,
Mm.
there's a part where there's a vision in that, and sometimes people say, "Oh, look, he had a resurrection too." But if you read the account, it's an apologetic for the immortality of the soul that certain Greeks believed in, and so
Mm.
you kind of see that in Star Wars. But it's interesting; it's only the redeemed or the good, and in fact, they hint in the prequels that it was sort of a learned thing to be able to communicate beyond the grave,
Mm.
so to speak, because Yoda says, Qui-Gon's learned how to do this, so the idea is apparently they didn't
Mm.
always know. But I do like the part where they where Rey is down and all the Jedi speak to her as far as in their voices, the echoes. I kind of dug that part, because they had
The
some.
cloud of witnesses from Hebrews almost.
I thought you might go there because they had Ahsoka Atana, who's from the Clone Wars series, so she's strictly an animated character. That was pretty fascinating. And then they also had a guy named Kanan, who's from Star Wars Rebels. So they actually even had people that are not even in the live action movies, and so that was sort of for the hardcore nerds right there. But I was digging that. And then they had, Mace Windu, Yoda, Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan. That was kind of cool. And they tried not to destroy Anakin's arc because, remember, he's supposed to be the chosen one who brings balance to the Force. But it's like, well, wait, did he really do it at the Emperor's back? And so, if you notice, they have him say, bring balance to the Force as I did. So it's like, they're trying to make sure, oh, Anakin did it. Just got to do it again, Rey. You know what I'm saying? But I like that part where all the voices were there. That was cool. That was fun, man. I still don't understand why didn't Rey just heal, Kylo Ren, Ben Solo real quick. They were just healing each other back and forth. I guess he just pieced out too fast for her. Like, why didn't she just heal him again? Since Star Wars healing is now a thing. Just saying. Oh, Abu, I don't know if you're muted. I can hear. All right, so
I can hear you.
Let's do this now. From the live chat. Now you can add your comments. Now you guys can add your comments. So BK Apologist quotes this line. This is my man Alfredo. Everybody subscribe to his channel. He puts out really dope content. We're going to be working with him, by God's grace, a lot more here in the new year coming up. He says, Rey to Kylo, I see through the cracks in your mask. You're haunted. Because he restored his mask that he destroyed in a fit of rage. And I read that there was actually a Japanese process that's an ancient tradition, sort of an artisan thing of how the Japanese fixed broken pottery. And I looked into this a little bit. It's going to get a little bit nerdy, but it's kind of cool because it's cross-cultural. Apparently, there's a view that's like the mistakes and errors are part of the beauty. And so it's part of the process. So I guess this ancient Japanese technique, they actually line the cracks when they reseal this broken pottery with gold. So it stands out specifically. It's not meant to blend in to where you can look at it and think it's seamless as if there was nothing that ever happened to the pottery. This ancient Japanese technique I was learning about is done where it's with gold as if to draw your attention to it, as if to say this is part of the beauty of the aesthetic, and it's sort of a greater meaning about scars and struggle and that kind of thing, right? Which I found pretty fascinating. And the idea is that's what Kylo did, because if you notice there's the red things, the cracks are not hidden. It didn't have to be that way. Aesthetically, it just looks cool, because red's kind of like the Sith color. Go team, go, red and black, just like Jabari, And so BK Apologists will get that. But I thought that was fascinating. I don't know if you remember that line, Abu, but that was a dope line, I thought.
Oh, yeah, no, I definitely remember that, about how she gets... Although I didn't connect it with what you're talking about the pronounced visibility of the cracks,
Right. And then he also brought in a quote. Luke says, because you're a Palpatine, Leia knew it too. She saw your spirit, your heart. Rey, some things are stronger than blood. Remember that?
That's interesting. That's also, something else that resonated with me in the film was that because when it said the film was going to be the Rise of the Skywalker, the question that I had throughout and leading into it is, which Skywalker are they referring to? Like, is Anakin going to reappear? Are they referring to Luke, or is this somehow a reference to Kylo Ren? I didn't think it was going to be a reference to Rey, or unless they would reveal that she actually descended from that line, but they made clear that she doesn't. She doesn't descend from that line, yet she's apparently the Skywalker that the title refers to, and she identifies as Skywalker at the end. Mm-hmm. What I take that to mean is that there's a conversion process there, that through her conversion, she takes on this new family, this new lineage almost. It's almost like something right out of like Galatians 3:29 or even Ephesians 2.
So like
she was on the outside of
our mystical union in Christ, to be in Christ, and what that means.
Mm-hmm. And that if you're Christ, then you're Abraham's seed, and so on down the line. Right. Or was it Romans 2? It talks about that kind of stuff, and also Romans 9:6, one of my favorite verses. That not all Israel is Israel, which I always took to imply that you can have descendants of Jacob which are not members of the true Israel. And here you have someone who descends from the ultimate evil. I mean, just about as vile a lineage as you can have, and yet she becomes part of a sort of royal lineage through her process of conversion.
To those who would get this super nerd reference, she's almost like the female Hellboy at that point. Okay, so looking at that, the Rise of Skywalker being a reference to Rey is interesting. However, I think you could also say it's in reference to Ben in a manner of speaking. Because remember, he's still Leia's son, and obviously So he's a Skywalker. Obviously, he has the name Solo because apparently, in that universe, the females, at least some of them, take the father's last name. But he's still a Skywalker, right? Well, check this out. He rises from the dead when Rey heals him, and he rises out of that cliff after Palpatine throws him over. It says, "As I fell, so shall you fall."
He descends into the earth and then comes back out of it. Yeah.
So you're giving a
raises others from the dead.
A reference there from, say, the Apostles' Creed, perhaps?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
All right, well, interesting very much. So we got some pretty interesting folks with some very interesting comments. Although Carm says, I'm clueless. So not everybody is on board with this. Fred says, I think this ruins the whole idea of Anakin being the chosen one. I do think that this movie does some damage to the prequels and the original trilogy. I see how they tried not to have it be that way. But at the end of the day, I know what you're saying, Fred. I kind of just say, you know what? This is fictional, and I'm going to do a little bit of postmodern interpretation, where if you guys know about postmodernism, it actually began sort of as a theory of art or a theory of literature, where the interpretation is subjective upon the subject, not objective based upon the intent. I am doing that a little bit with some of this Star Wars nonsense. Meaning, in my own way, I'm putting together how it doesn't ruin Anakin's arc, because I think that's important to not touch. I think Disney is dumb, which is strange. It's like they don't know how to tell a story of the biggest franchise, the biggest intellectual property in the history of the modern world. I think it's bizarre. But in my mind, I know what you're saying, Fred. I think you're right. But in my little imagination, it doesn't. BK Paul just has a good comment. I know what I have to do, but I don't know if I have the strength to do it. When Kylo Ren says that to his dream version of his dad, and Han Solo says, "You do." You remember that line?
Absolutely, yeah. Yep. Out by the water.
Yeah. What about this? What about BK Paul just bringing this quote in? Kylo Ren is dead. My son is alive. What do you think of that when Han said that to
Well,
Kylo?
what's great about that is that's the reverse of the whole idea of Anakin Skywalker being dead and Darth Vader replacing him. It's sort of the reverse of that. That this idea that who you are, you become a new person one way or the other.
Yeah, I think that's legit, man. Wow, this is out there. I did not know we were gonna have. It's funny. I see a couple people dipping out, like I don't know what these people are talking about. Look, I say every now and then that part of what I do is pop cultural, theological analysis. Every now and then you'll see that pop up on my bios. Now I don't get to do it as much as I want. I think Nate likes it when I do it. I don't know who else does or doesn't. Notice I'm having a boo on because he's got the whole St. Andrew's cruciform thing bubbling, which I would not have had that. Interesting CS. We'll call that a Tolkienian, Lewisianian, Justin Martyr insight.
Even Tertullian. Tertullian was the first one to bring up the point. I had never seen this before. I was reading Tertullian, a decade ago, when he brought up the point that in Ezekiel 9:4, the mark that's placed on the forehead of the people who are saved is, in the Hebrew, it literally says Tau, and the Tau is the name of the last character. They say Tav in modern Hebrew, the last character of the Hebrew alphabet. Now, in the original Hebrew script, or maybe not the original, but the Phoenician script, what's popularly called the Paleo-Hebrew script, the Tau is a cruciform, whether like a cross or like a plus sign or like St. Andrew's cross, an X. And it's quite interesting that Ezekiel 9:4, if read literally, has a cruciform being placed on the foreheads of those who won't die.
Fascinating.
And it was Tertullian who pointed that out. Yeah, so that's why I love all these references to the cruciform.
Yeah, I'm looking the Tau. You're saying the Tau. So what?
The very last Hebrew character.
Okay, yeah, no. Everybody, if you look, I'm craning my neck up, and the reason is because I have this thing called a card wall chart of Hebrew scripts, and it actually shows throughout the centuries from the oldest example of anything that could be called Paleo-Hebrew that we have all the way until modern Hebrew, and I'm looking at it right now. I bought this at ETS last year, not this one, but the last year before that. And you're exactly right. I see the oldest Paleo-Hebrew sign, and it is exactly what you're saying. I might even put my webcam around just so people can see it.
Yeah, I would love to see your chart. Yeah, so I maybe others want to see this as well.
I don't know if this is gonna work. I'm
or
never
at least
tried
take a
this
photograph
before.
and put it on one of your social media sites,
Let me see. Oh, I'm trying.
later
I'm
on.
trying. I'm trying. I'm
Oh yeah,
trying
no, this
this.
is good. This is good.
I'm trying. This is a little. I've never done this before, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, I don't think I'm gonna be able to get all of it.
Yeah, bottom left hand corner though. It's
Yeah,
the
now I
bottom
see
left
it
hand
right
corner
there.
is that
Yep.
Tau. Yep. So if I can see it, then I'm sure others
Yeah.
can see it. That's the Tau. In modern Hebrew, it's called Tav, because the Wa, the sixth, But it's yeah. So that's the Tau or Tav. That also became the Greek Tau, which is very similarly named and also similarly shaped, especially in its subsequent lowercase form. But yeah, that's the Phoenician Tau, which became part of the Hebrew script and as well as the later on the Greek
Right.
script.
So it's right there. You guys see, right there on the edge. Don't look at the other things. Let's look at this last one at the edge of the screen. That's it. So that's what we're talking about here. Fascinating. So we got some very interesting people. So look, Star Wars, as far as nostalgia and sort of my life, sort of, I know it's a fantasy property and all that, but sort of meant a lot to me in a lot of ways. And so, this Disney trilogy is silly, and at certain points hurts my heart, to be honest. However, with all that being said, I just have to kind of step outside of all that, sort of the way I kind of looked at the original trilogy, and kind of put this in the realm of like breaking down the fourth wall and getting meta with it and saying, look, it is what it is. It's fictional. They did this, they did that. It doesn't have any long-term eternal consequence. I know it sounds silly, but this is what I have to do to not be basically upset or emotional. So basically, lack of attachment toward this helps me. So I just kind of step out and say,
There's that lack of attachment bit.
yeah,
In, huh?
no, I'm serious. I have to do that because I see reviews online in Abu. So there's some people who get pretty upset, and I think it's because they don't have that perspective. Like people who've cared about this in their life and in their past. And there are some people who I've been watching a lot of reviews. There are some people they get pretty angry, and I think it's because they don't have that ability, And it's weird. This stuff can do stuff to people, and so just kind of step out. But with that being said, shout out to everybody. I think it is time for us to switch over to the Boom Boom Room. Are you ready for that?
Inshallah.
Well, do you have any last comments while I get this? Because it's going to take me a second to get it
Well,
set
I'll
up.
say this: the one thought that I had when you're talking about how disturbing the changes are. I think even that there's a parallel with Christian history, or at least with biblical history, insofar as the overall message unfolds. It can have twists and turns and surprises that can strike many people as very disturbing. I think that's even true of biblical history. I mean, if you could imagine yourself being in the early part of the first part of the first century, at the dawn of the Common Era, imagine yourself as a Jew who's fairly familiar with what came to be called the Tanakh, with the Hebrew scriptures that existed before the advent of Christianity. What would you expect? What would be your beliefs about God? What would be your beliefs about the Messiah? I think it's fairly well known that many Jews were expecting a Messiah who would triumph over Rome. And, how would you feel if you believe that this man is the Messiah, and you're expecting him to take Rome's foot off of your neck, and instead he is apparently executed by Rome, and so on, even with the belief in God, what sort of things did Jews believe back then? Where maybe some of them were Binitarians, maybe some of them were Unitarians, but would you be prepared for an unveiling of the Trinity at that time of your life, at that time of history, and so on down the line? I think that even within biblical history, I imagine that as things unfolded, things felt disturbing, and even within the Old Testament, I imagine that's the case. Imagine, understanding, if in the time of Jeremiah or Hosea, you fairly understand the Torah fairly well, and you know that sacrifices are commanded, and then suddenly this prophet is telling you something to the effect that seems to be saying that no, God didn't command sacrifices, or prefers mercy more than sacrifices, knowledge of God more than sacrifices and oblations and burnt offerings and so on down the line. I imagine even then that would be somewhat disturbing, and I think that's sort of part of the arc of biblical history, that when a new revelation comes out, people flip out, to be blunt, and react violently. Now, of course, it's bordering on blasphemy to compare the Star Wars sort of franchise to biblical history, but nonetheless, the point is that as a story unfolds, people who love the early elements of it can be disturbed by the turns that it takes and the difficult to reconcile parts.
I think that's legit. All right. Speaking of disturbing, I find your lack of faith disturbing. Now let's see everybody if you're going to be able to hear this. Okay, so we are going to play the recent Boom Boom Room. It's only 9 minutes and 46 seconds long. The reason why we're doing this, it's actually not the most recent one because Santa Claus has come out. I'm going to review that as well. This is Parody Apologetics, and we're going to review it together. I don't know if you're going to be able to hear it, Abu, so I'll have to tell you what's going on line upon line, precept upon precept, but you've already seen it, of course. And everybody, let me know if you find an echo. Let me know, everybody, if you hear an echo or not. Okay, here we go. Here's the Boom Boom Room where Muhammad meets Darth Vader. Welcome to Muhammad's Boom Boom Room, where all of my guests either agree with me completely or they go boom. I am your host, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon me. And with me now is a Sith Lord from a galaxy far, far away. He is Darth Vader. So nice to have you, Mr. Vader.
It's Lord Vader.
I don't want to call you Lord. How about Master?
You may dispense with the pleasantries, Muhammad. I am here to put you back on schedule.
Peace be upon me. But okay, Master Vader. Now, real quick, let me say, that joke that is taking place was 100% David Wood's doing. I wanted no part of it, but it happened anyway. Much like J.J. Abrams watching The Last Jedi and seeing Rian Johnson's mistaken directorial choices, that's how I feel when I watch this particular part. Now with that, it appears everybody can hear it, and I'm hoping that you guys can hear it. I want to make sure there is no echo, so continue to let me know about that. So now we are going to have Darth Vader briefly choke Muhammad, and Abu, you probably remember there was a joke in there about the angel Gabriel. Can you speak briefly about that? Do you have anything to say about that?
Well, I mean, it's a recurring theme in the Boom Boom Room because also the episode with Satan has the same thing, has some choking going on. Yes, there are extra Quranic traditions, extra Quranic hadith, which have a description of the angel Gabriel, Jibril is squeezing Muhammad and, perhaps choking him, something to that effect. There's a certain physical roughness going on during the process of revelation and I guess getting him to recite. I don't know. I don't recall though the proximity of that to the command of the command Iqra, but whatever the case.
Recite. Now, I guess in the Arabic, I've heard that it could just be pressed up against, because usually the Muslim apologetics responses I've heard have to do with, well, you're not understanding that. That's to press up against. But I also have heard...
Or squeeze, as the way I recall it. But
yes.
I mean, yeah, I'm far from any sort of expert, so I don't even recall what the text states. But yeah, something to the effect of squeezing, which David Wood has... he's followed down the path of interpreting it to mean... choking, which is a theme that's come up in the Boom Boom Room several times.
Which is a way it can be translated or understood or interpreted, is my understanding. You know what I'm saying? And even if not, the question is, what exactly is going on there? It's have you heard common Muslim apologetic responses to the squeezing or the smashing or gripping or choking of Gabriel by Muhammad as he tells him to recite? Have you heard?
No, unfortunately not. When I became interested in Islam, I sort of went down this path of having a certain disdain for the ahadith, and I hope my Muslim friends will forgive me. I don't mean that disparagingly now, but nonetheless, that was sort of where I went. And so because I was never super interested in the hadith, I never really got into the polemics that sort of revolve around them or around not only the sort of explicit hadith collections, but also the biographies, the seerah literature and so on.
Yes, some of them are rather explicit. It's a joke. I don't think that's what you meant by explicit.
No, and of course not.
Okay. All right, continuing on, I'm going to play that line right here so people already have the context of it.
Be careful not to choke on your own imaginations, Muhammad.
Careful about what, Master Vader? All I said was...
You are as childish as you are stupid.
Are you sure you're not the angel Gabriel under there? You choked me just like him.
Perhaps this angel of yours is also a Dark Lord of the Sith.
So I love that part. So when Muhammad asked the questions, which is funny to say, out of all the things you could say when someone is choking you through telekinesis, to say, are you sure you're not the angel Gabriel under there? You choked me just like him. I think that's such a funny thing to say, right? And what he says is, perhaps this angel of yours is also a Dark Lord of the Sith. Comment on that, Abu.
Well, again, that sort of lines up with the Satan episode of the Boom Boom Room, where clearly, which itself mirrors this idea that some people who read these accounts of Muhammad and apparently the angel Gabriel are disturbed by what's being described and feel that it's something darker. Obviously, the Boom Boom Room, where he speaks with Satan, is very explicit as to who that might be, but nonetheless, it's something, this is a biblical concept, that Satan himself can appear as an angel of light. Now, that's...
Apostle Paul says that in Galatians. Some Christians are inclined to see the episodes of recite with the angel Gabriel supposedly as perhaps an example of what Paul is talking about in Galatians. And so what we're trying to do is draw attention to that fact in the sources. We're trying to draw people's attention to those sources, because what I've seen is, like during Ramadan, for example, when I've interacted with some Muslim friends of mine, right, they talk about these hadith accounts of the first recitations as if they're just a given. I don't hear them talking about the choking or the squeezing or whatever you'd want to. But I do hear them speaking things that are clearly from the hadith that they're speaking about. You know what I'm saying? And so it's important to them, because this is like, the idea is like, this is when Muhammad first received the Quran. And when we read the sources in the hadith, we're like, this is really bizarre. This is strange, And so we're just drawing attention to that. Continuing on. You're fortunate I don't pull out my own special sword. It was originally owned by Goliath. Okay, now, this is the part where Muhammad says, you're lucky I don't pull out my own special sword. It was owned by Goliath. So this gets into sort of Islamic folklore. It's not in the Hadith. It is not in the Quran. But if you look up articles on actually this topic, possessions of Muhammad, or you can see in the Deen show, the truth about Prophet Muhammad and his sword. There's a video on YouTube right now, Islamic history, the sword of the Prophet. It's 2 parts, or the sword of the Prophet by Muslim Knight. There's a lot of this. There's another section you can look up, relics of Muhammad. Believe it or not, the United States Naval Academy has a discussion on this and has all these entries about these various items, usually weapons he was supposed to own. And I'm simply talking about one of those in particular. Because have you seen a lot of sort of legendary... how I feel like there was some legendary aspects happening in medieval Christianity, that some people adopted. And I feel like there's a lot of that in actual standard Islam, Abu. Maybe you have a different opinion. Sort of.
No, you're absolutely
can you
right.
Can you talk about that?
Certainly, yeah, absolutely. There is a sort of Catholic parallel where the Catholic Church, or let me rephrase that, people within the Catholic Church have certainly, especially in the medieval ages, seem to have found everything from Christian history, and conveniently a lot of it in Europe. Every piece of a cross. There were people who claimed. Well, let me not rephrase that. There were people who claimed to have body parts of of even Christ. And if I remember reading many years ago, and I don't have a source for this, unfortunately, that Martin Luther, when he was still a teacher within the Catholic Church, had once remarked that regarding all the tombs of the apostles and all that he had once quipped, sort of mocking some of the ideas out there, that 17 of the 12 apostles have been found buried in Europe alone.
Right? Yeah. That's a good line, right? Isn't that a great line?
Yeah, and so I guess some of these sort of parallels have now I'm in no place to talk about which relics are authentic and which are not within Islam. I'm not even in a place to do that within Christianity. But yes, apparently there is somewhat of a parallel within Islam where there's this, there's a number of people claiming to have various relics and also burial sites. I mean, a lot of people don't know this, but the Muslim world is filled with the burial sites of even previous prophets, biblical figures. The tomb of Jonah, and the tomb. There's people who make claims about the tomb of Adam, and so on down the line.
Yeah, and
the tomb of Jesus. There's people who claim there's something to that effect around the Euphrates. I've heard like Ismailis say this or something like that. But I'm vague on that one.
even when it comes to these traditions about Muhammad and these swords, which he's said to have 9 of them, they all have their different names. What's interesting about that is 2 of them are said to have been given to him through inheritance, 3 through the process of pillage, and even today in 2019. 8 of the 9 swords that are said to have belonged to Muhammad are actually in the Topkapi Museum in Istanbul, Turkey, right now. And one of them is in a mosque, I guess, in Jordan, the other one. So you can look this stuff up. So that's what I'm talking about there, because because I wrote the majority of the script. I wrote most of the script. And what I wanted to try to do with the script is to draw some different parallels, you know what I mean, with Vader and Muhammad. And so I started looking into it, researching, Muhammad's weaponry or sword, because obviously Vader has a lightsaber. And so Muhammad's sort of in a good mood, but he's telling Vader, hey, you're lucky I don't pull out my own sword, because, he just choked him, right? But he starts getting excited talking about the sword, and then while he's speaking about it, of course, Vader turns on his own lightsaber, you know what I'm saying? And that's what's going on here. So it's drawing attention to those aspects of sort of folk Islam that I think are fascinating. So let's play this part as he speaks on it. So King David took it. My favorite thing about my sword is it has a picture of King David chopping Goliath's head off. I like pictures because, as everyone knows, I cannot read. But pictures of people's heads getting chopped off are my favorite. Some people believe my special sword is the same one Isa will use when he returns to kill all the pigs and the Antichrist. It's called the Sword of the Prophets. So I love that effect. Shout out to Conman Mike. He's the one who did the special effects on this episode. And he puts the sound in there. And if you notice right, when he does it, Muhammad is speaking, you see the glare light up on Muhammad's face, the red glare from the blade. I thought it was just epic. So I don't know, Abu, did you ever look much into Muhammad's weapons or weaponries or anything? You want to say anything about pillage?
No. I felt like I was learning some new things as I was seeing that come up. I'm sorry.
Well, what about this? If you notice, I mentioned some say this will be the sword that Muhammad uses when he comes back to slay the Antichrist and the pigs. What about
that? Jesus will, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know that about specifically the sword, but yes, of course, there's in terms of Orthodox Islamic eschatology, there's, you're going to have the Antichrist, or literally the lying Messiah, the Masih, ad-Dajjal, and then you're going to have Jesus himself is going to come back and slay this false Messiah. By the way, if I'm not mistaken, there's a Netflix series that sort of plays on the Dajjal concept. Have you heard about this? Netflix, I think it is, has a series called Messiah, and but the character's name is, when you look into it, his name is Dajjal. Yeah, there's about a false Messiah, and it's not explicit in the trailer, but apparently it's going to be from somewhat of a Muslim perspective. Anyway, forgive that segue.
Really?
Yeah, that Christ is going to come back and not only slay the Antichrist according to Islamic eschatology, but also there's hadiths that talk about it. It's in Bukhari, in Bukhari's Sahih. There's this strange, at least in my opinion. I mean, I'm sure there's some commentary that explains it, but there's this discussion, there's this reference to Christ coming back and killing the pigs. He's going to break the cross and kill the pigs. Whether or not that's meant literally or not, that latter part, I don't know.
Yeah, what do you think is up with that? Because I've always understood that to be sort of standard Islamic eschatology. To smash all the crosses.
It's in Bukhari,
yeah, smash all the crosses and kill all the pigs. It's going to be Jesus doing it, supposedly, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And yeah. And if it's
Sorry, I'm so sorry. I remember now that's in the script. I don't know why real quick. I want you guys to notice that I say the sword that Isa will use. So I don't know if you guys caught that. Isa is the mistaken Arabic name that Muslims use for Jesus. Although shouldn't it be Yasu?
Yasua would be closer to Yeshua. I wouldn't call Isa mistaken. I would just say that much like the English Jesus, it's the result of a long process of evolution, possibly going through multiple languages.
What isn't
That's what I
Esau
think.
the Arabic term for Esau?
It's very close, except that the name for Jesus has essentially so I've heard people call it Ya Fata, but it's an alif maksura. No, not al maksura. I'm sorry. It's an alif at the end, and Esau, what we call Esau, has a wa at the end instead. So the spelling is very similar, but it's not identical. What it's very similar to is the Mandaic name for Jesus, which coincidentally is also identical to the name for Esau as well. It's ayin sin wa in Mandaic. So I'm of the opinion that Mandaic provides some insight into how the Quranic name came about. But I don't think it's the Quran necessarily making a mistake. I think it's just the Quran being a product of its environment, that it came about in an environment where people were calling Jesus by that name, and therefore it referred to him by that name. Although is it Geiger? Abraham Geiger proposed that it grew out of Jewish polemics, that Jews were calling Jesus Esau, and it came out of that. And the fascinating thing is there are hadiths which refer to Isa, to Jesus, as being red and white, and Esau being red is such a big deal in the Bible, and of course our Israelite fans love to harp on that as well.
Yeah, because when I looked into this, it looks like Isa is closer to Esau than it would be to Yesu. And when I've been involved with Arabic Christians, if you say Esau around them, they're like, no, and all the songs they sing and everything else, as far as just in my limited experience, is Yesu or Yeshua. They're not about that Isa. They're not exactly about that Isa business. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
And they'll.
I think Mandaic is. I'm not saying the Quran necessarily, that Mandaic is necessarily the medium that it went through, but it provides insight, because that apparently did have it happen with Mandaic. That one thing that happens with Semitic languages is that sometimes a yod or a ya is dropped and replaced by an ayin. And that seems to have happened in Mandaic. The name of Christ originally had a yod, the equivalent of the y, and then in Mandaic it became written with an ayin. So in sort of Eastern forms of Syriac, Jesus is, instead of called Yeshua, he's called Isho or Yeshua, and so apparently Isho came to be written curiously in a way that's exactly the same that Esau is spelled. I haven't looked into this for many years, but I have a very old video on it. Nice. It's called something Ahmed did that in the Islamic name of Jesus, I think it's titled. But
all right,
I'm
so
working from fuzzy memory. Sorry,
if you notice,
shameless plug.
If you notice, check out Abu's channel. Everybody subscribe to that for sure. If you notice here, you'll hear Muhammad say, some say it's the sword Isa would use for that. So we're getting a little bit into Islamic eschatology at that point, but here's the line again. Isa will use when he returns to kill all the pigs and the Antichrist. It's called the sword of the prophets.
Counterfeit religion and ancient weapons are no match for a good lightsaber at your side.
Now, I love that line, because Vader says to Muhammad, counterfeit religions and ancient weapons are no match for a good lightsaber at your side. We purposely would repurpose lines in Star Wars and have Vader or Muhammad say them. So it's not just Vader's lines, it's Star Wars lines. So Han Solo says that to Luke when Ben Kenobi is training him on the deck of the Millennium Falcon with the little seeker probe droid or whatever it is. He says hokey religions and ancient weapons are no match for a good blast at your side, kid. So it's funny, we have Vader dissing when he calls Islam counterfeit religion and then refers to an ancient weapon. So there's a lot of subversion and repurposing here in the script. And if you notice, Muhammad responds, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, with another line from Star Wars from another character. Let's check this out. Really? Well, my religion is now the ultimate power in the universe. Allah commands, I use it. Originally, that was when they were discussing the Death Star, and the guy says, this station is now the ultimate power in the universe. I suggest we use it. And then Vader responds, don't be too proud of this technological terror you've constructed. The ability to blow up a planet is insignificant compared to before. And so then, so it's funny, so all that's going on here, so check this out.
Don't be too proud of this suicide vest you've constructed. The ability to blow up a boom boom room is insignificant next to the power of the Force.
Well, the power of the Force is insignificant next to the power of prophecy.
Don't try.
So he says, well, the power of the Force is insignificant next to the power of prophecy. Now, can you talk about that a little bit? The concept of prophecy in Islam is interesting to me, Abu, considering Muhammad. It's debatable if he ever uttered a prophecy. Sometimes I see Muslim apologists point to one in the Quran about, conquering or returning to a certain city or something like that.
The Romans and the Persians, yeah, and what's interpreted to mean the lowest land. They claim it's the area in Palestine, near the Dead Sea or something like that. Or they'll say Jerusalem, which isn't quite the lowest land, but nonetheless.
Yeah, so what are the places that they point to and when they say, well, Muhammad did give, because I thought it's also the case that Muhammad said, I'm not going to give you any prophecy or any miracles other than the miracle of the Quran. It seemed to relate, but then again, they say that he did. That always threw me off a little bit. Can you talk about the concept of prophecy
to be
within
fair,
Islamic theology?
Modern Muslims, while it's not exactly prophecy, I mean, a lot of, not all, maybe it's a minority, but at least within the dawah giving community in the English language, the scientific miracles are very popular. I know that's not quite the same as prophecy, but it's something akin to that you have all these modern scientific discoveries and Muslim. But anyway, I digress. The whole thing with the Romans and the Persians is usually an example given as a prophecy that the Romans will one side will be victorious and then the other side will come back and defeat them, and and this is supposed to happen in an area that can be described as the lower land or the lowest land, and it just so happens that one of the lowest places on the earth is in Palestine. And so some people say, it's referring to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is not the lowest point on earth, but nonetheless, somewhat in that general vicinity is the idea.
Well, so Muslims in the modern era would say Muhammad gave prophecies then most of the time.
Oh yeah, they would definitely say something to that effect, or that the message which was transmitted through him. I don't know about. I'd have to think. Well, actually, they would say that there's also, because the Quran is not so much his words; it's just the message that's transmitted through him. But even in the hadiths, there's I'm saying within the Muslim perspective, the hadiths are filled with apparent prophecies, predictions about the end of the world, and there's constant attempts to interpret those hadiths in light of modern events. One of my favorite examples of that is the hadiths talk about when Dajjal comes, he's going to have just one eye, and he's going to lead a massive army of Jews. One place says 70,000 Jews from Isfahan and all this, and people have tried to reconcile that. Well, maybe the Jews from Isfahan aren't literal Jews, maybe they're Shia and all that. But then, lo and behold, you get to the 1960s, and all of a sudden the Jews have an army, and one of the people leading that army is Moshe Dayan, who has one eye. And so at the time in the 60s, there were people who were thinking, wait a minute, this is the prophecy is obvious and clear as you can get. Of course, it didn't pan out that way, but there's lots of examples like that. Here's something. Saudi Arabia now is taking a sort of seemingly secular turn in certain parts of the country. While you still have very austere places like Mecca and Medina, in parts of like Riyadh and Jeddah, there's a situation where they're suddenly having movie theaters and big concerts and dance, these sort of vast music shows and stuff like that. And people are pointing to certain hadiths which they feel point to that. That hadiths that seem to be obscure now they feel are prophecies about Saudi Arabia under Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia.
All right, I'm going to be careful what questions I ask you because we might be
Sorry,
going.
I'm a bit of a segue here.
But all right, we continue to play this. I got love for you, homie. All right, here we go.
With your sorcerer's ways, Muhammad. Your sad devotion to that counterfeit religion has not helped you conjure up one predictive prophecy, or given you the clairvoyance enough to find yourself buried in the pages of the Hebrew scriptures.
Or giving you clairvoyance enough to find yourself buried in the pages of the Hebrew Scriptures. He's repurposing a line there that's given originally to him, and that is saying that the Quran and indeed Islamic apologetics say that Muhammad is prophesied in the Bible, and they go to various passages, and it seems like it's a game of whack-a-mole, you know what I mean? I've seen that analogy used. And, where can you find Muhammad? They say he's here, and then apologists and linguists, smash it down, and they got him over here. It seems like the current popular one is Isaiah 42. So constantly going to the Old Testament, the miracle of Muhammad being prophesied in Isaiah 42, and I think that's getting smashed down as we speak. So Vader's just pointing out the obvious that Muhammad is not predicted in the Bible. Anything to say about that, Abu?
I I think you pretty much covered that. I'd say let's go on, because you know me with my segues.
Well,
but go ahead.
I know
once we start discussing Muhammad in the Bible, I'll wind up in Song of Songs, and we'll be 15 minutes away from.
or the other big place they would go to is the farewell discourse, John 13 to 15, in those chapters, right?
Yeah, the Paraclete. Yeah, it's not Tazadaki, it's Muhammad. Yeah,
that's right. Peace be upon me. I am a prophet. You want proof? I have a giant mole on my back. Luke!
Did you just...
I have a giant mole on my back. Luke. Obviously, we did all this on purpose. We wanted to take a turn to sort of start turning Vader into the good guys compared to Muhammad. Can you speak about the giant mole on the back, Abu?
Well, that's another thing that's not in the Quran. It's one of these, again, extra Quranic hadiths, and I say extra Quranic because the Quran itself is. I know some Muslims won't like this, but the Quran itself is a form of hadith. But whatever, the hadiths that come outside of it, or maybe it's in one of these biographies, there's these situations where people have this knowledge of the final prophet that's to come, whether it's Waraka or somebody else. But various people, various Jews and Christians, have some sort of knowledge of the final prophet to come. And if I'm not mistaken, one of these details, in some story, some tradition, there's a mole that gives it away. But
so. In what way have you heard people speak about that in some way the mold on Muhammad's back could be a sign of him being a prophet?
Oh, no, I mean, I've heard very little of that. I just remember that coming up if I'm not mistaken, that was some sort of a sign, a small part amongst a whole bunch of other signs. But again, it's the sort of extra Quranic literature that I never got deep into. But that's the way I recall it. One of these traditions, or one of these stories about someone having a whole bunch of signs lined up, and I think the mole was in the midst of that, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know. Well, tell me what you heard. I don't know.
Well, I've heard different things. I think, if I'm not mistaken, this confirmation is supposed to even come from a Christian or a priest, if I'm not mistaken, at one time, saying that's how they would recognize him or something like that. And I've heard Muslims say, well, it's not a mole, it's just something unique about his skin. But it gets real confusing. But the thing is, I hear average Muslims, it's like when they talk amongst each other, this is what they do use. Shout out to Roxby. Merry Christmas to you, sis, for the super chat. All right, continue on playing the lines here.
Luke?
Did you say Luke?
No.
No.
Why?
Why?
Luke
is my son.
Was he adopted?
This is one of my favorite parts. David Wood did a fantastic Darth Vader voice. He literally went into the other room with Con Man Mike and took a plastic cup I had in my house and just spoke into it. And he was like, oh, I do this all the time. Like, he was like, oh, this will be no big deal. Because, he did it live, recorded it live. That way we could get the body motions down. Similar to David Prowse. David Prowse, the original actor for Darth Vader, was a bodybuilder. And they weren't going to use his accent because I guess he had a really bad hickish kind of British accent where even the crew was laughing basically at him because he sounded like a hick. As far as this particular, I forget what part of Britain it was from or whatever, but they needed the body language still to be accurate and also to interact with the characters and stuff like that. But James Earl Jones, was going to provide that deep, rich voice at the end, at the end of the day, right? So we did that, but you can't use that voice because it's coming through the mask and stuff. And of course, David's really in the suit. Dude is all hot and sweaty, man. He's only in there for 20 minutes. It was bad. So he goes to the other room, takes the cup, speaks into it. I cannot believe how well he did it. That's all he did. He just spoke into this cup. And the intonations and everything how he did it was masterful. And this is my favorite part because he does it exactly right of how it should be done. There's only one part I think he should have done differently. He nailed it unbelievably amazing. It's like this is really Vader speaking in my head. So check it out. It says, so Muhammad asks him, Luke, is he adopted? And Vader says, yes, but I am his father. I love that. So this is going to get into adoption. So Abu, get ready in a second here to do the discussion about the adoption, all right? Because I'm going to let it play for a second.
Son.
Was he adopted?
Yes, but I am his father.
I once had a son.
Was he adopted?
Yes, and then I unadopted him.
I would be honored if you would explain.
Okay, I once had an Arab slave named Zaid. Khadija gave him to me as a wedding gift. One of my many slaves I was given over the years. But, unlike all my female sex slaves and all my black African slaves, I became emotionally attached to Zaid. Eventually, I adopted him as my son. From then on, he was known as Zaid, son of Muhammad, and was regarded socially and legally as my son.
Even though I am more machine now than man, twisted and evil, this story is rather touching. It reminds me of how Uncle Owen Lars adopted my son, Luke.
Tell me, whatever happened to them?
Okay, so gotta stop here real quick. Shout out to Connor for the super chat, by the way. I appreciate your comments about the Boom Boom Room. So, to the hardcore Star Wars nerds in the audience, yes, I know Uncle Owen is not Vader's uncle. I know it's Luke's uncle. I understand that. But we're referring to him as a title. If you listen to the script, Vader never says my uncle. He says Uncle Owen, because that's what he's always referred to in the movie, okay? So it's kind of like if you have a brother and you're talking to your kids and you say, oh yeah, we're going to go see Uncle Joe. It's just like that, okay? That's all Vader's doing here. And the reason we're doing that...
Or sister of Aaron.
Yeah, yeah. The reason we're doing that, though, is to connect it to Abu Lahab, okay? Because they're going to take a little brief rabbit trail in this adoption discussion into Abu Lahab. And the crazy thing about... I wrote this, but David polished some of the adoption stuff up. This comes out of an interview I did with David Wood and Sam Shamoon back when I basically first met them. And in that, we were just talking and discussing, and I made some offhand comment about Vader, and I forget exactly how it was. And as a result, David says, so the moral of the story is Darth Vader was a better father than Muhammad. And that's kind of the nucleus or the germ that grew from this. But now we're going to talk about Abu Lahab, who is Muhammad's uncle, who Muhammad had a curse basically for him in Surah 111. Now I've changed the order of the verses to end with ruining of the hands of Abu Lahab. I had to do that to make it work so that it's jumbled out of order if you read Surah 111, but all the lines are there. It's all from Surah 111. And so, do you know anything about that account before I play that part, Abu, as far as Abu Lahab and the curse that was brought upon him, you know, or anything like that?
Well, I mean, as you bring up or not you, your character brings up, as is alluded to, it's in the Quran. He's described in, was it the 111th chapter,
Mm-hmm.
I think, and so on down the line. But yeah, beyond that, no, continue.
Yeah. All right, so, and I think Gerard Perry makes a good point. I don't think, because he says without describing who Abu Lahab was or what he'd done, I think Gerard's right. I don't know if it was described what he's done. But here we're going to see some of the similarities between the villainous Darth Vader and the, at times, villainous Muhammad the Prophet. Here we go.
I ordered my stormtroopers to burn Uncle Owen alive.
Ironic! I also ordered my own uncle, Abu Lahab, to be burned forever. As Surah 111 says, he will burn in a fire of blazing flame, and his wife as well, the carrier of firewood. Around her neck is a rope of twisted fiber. May the hands of Abu Lahab be ruined, and ruined is he.
So again, quoting it, and there he's talking about in hellfire. So it's not a temporal, it's an eternal thing he's talking about. But notice it's the wife as well, and that's perfect because Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru were ordered burned alive. You know, that's what the Stormtroopers did to them. And remember when Luke returns back to his little moisture farm there on Tatooine and looks and he just sees these flaming skeletons, you know, they're freshly dead, it looked like. That's what that is. So that's what they're talking about.
Ironic. I also ruined the hand of my son Luke during our duel on Cloud City.
You, sir, are as cold as ice.
But please tell me more about your adopted son, Zaid.
You mean unadopted?
How did that happen?
Well, I once went to visit my adopted son, Zaid. He wasn't home, but his wife, Zainab, was. Then the wind blew, and I saw her partially uncovered while she was in her chambers.
Once Admiral Piet saw me partially uncovered while I was in my chamber. He was repulsed.
That's the line I was trying to draw the parallel. I wish David would have said it like, once Admiral Piet saw me when I was partially uncovered in my chamber, he was repulsed. That's in Empire Strikes Back when he's in his little tank. I forget what it's called. There's like a restoration tank he's in, and you see the back of Anakin's, Vader's skull or whatever, and that's what he's talking about there. And he's saying, repulsed. So they're drawing parallels between their life story, but in this case, Muhammad's gonna say, I was aroused.
When I saw my adopted son's wife in her chambers, I was aroused.
But my spies informed me that Zainab was not only your daughter-in-law, but also your cousin.
Yes, and my cousin, Zainab, excited my admiration, if you know what I mean. When I walked away after seeing her practically naked, I blurted out, "Glory be to Allah the Almighty! Glory be to Allah, who causes hearts to turn."
Since you knew she was a married woman, why did you have to say this out loud?
Clearly, Allah was working through Momo's mojo in order to teach Muslims a valuable lesson.
What lesson?
That it's okay to marry the wives of your adopted sons.
You married her?
Yes. When Zayd found out that I'd been lusting after his wife, who was also my daughter-in-law and cousin, he divorced her so that I could have her. Then Allah said in the Quran that he needed me to marry her so that other Muslims would understand that they also too can marry the wives of their adopted sons.
I thought you said you unadopted him.
I did, but that was after people kept making fun of me for marrying my adopted son's wife, who was also my daughter-in-law and cousin. Allah didn't want people making fun of me, so he abolished adoption in Islam.
If there was no more adoption in Islam, why did Allah need you to marry Zainab in order to convince Muslims that it's okay to marry the wives of their adopted sons? There weren't going to be any more adopted sons.
All right, Abu, this is a good time for you to come in. Can you speak on what you know about the account of Muhammad marrying his divorced adopted son's wife, who was also his cousin and daughter-in-law previously?
Yeah, so a lot of this revolves around, I don't know a lot about it, but it revolves around in the 33rd chapter of the Quran. There's this obscure reference to how whoever it's addressing, it says, you refer to your wives as your mothers. They're not your mothers. You refer to your adopted sons as sons, but they're not your sons. I'm loosely paraphrasing, but essentially that, your wives are not your mothers. Your adopted sons are not your actual sons. And now I have to admit, this is where I might diverge from David here. I don't think the hadiths or the various literature that attempts to describe that is necessarily historical, but it attempts to do something that seems to like midrash to me, but the explanation there is apparently that revelation pertains to him marrying a woman who was previously married to his adopted son. And so the understanding is that it's nullifying, the Quranic verse is nullifying this idea that your adopted son is your actual son. In the West, in polemics against Islam, it's popular to say that therefore Islam has done away with adoption. That came up in Islamicize Me, where your character had to send his adopted son away. But of course, adoption is permitted in Islam. It's even recommended. It was the term mustahab or something like that. But it's just that an adopted son doesn't have the same, I don't know if rights is the right word, but the rulings that pertain to an adopted son do not, pertain to a biological son do not pertain to an adopted son. And apparently this was the claim, the explanation is that this was done so as to make room for this marriage to a woman that was previously married to his adopted son. That he couldn't marry his son's wife, but he could marry his adopted son's wife. Now, whether or not that's historical, whether or not that's the intention of the relevant verse, I'm quite doubtful. But whatever the case, it's a popular part of polemics against Islam.
Have you ever had these kind of discussions or heard these kind of discussions with apologetically minded Muslims yourself?
Yeah, well, I certainly hear Muslims become apoplectic when they hear a Christian say Islam forbid adoption. They say that's ridiculous, and that is a popular claim. Of course, adoption still exists in the Muslim world. You're allowed to adopt, as I said earlier. It's considered recommended. It's just that the emphasis is on this idea that the rules that apply to biological sons do not pertain to adopted sons. There's some sort of distinct difference, and this is apparently one of them.
Well, there is the verse in the Quran that has to be explained. Muhammad is not the father of any of these men. It's got to be dealt with. All right, so with that, continuing on, because Vader's shocked. You married her? I love Vader's reaction to this.
Well, as my child bride Aisha used to say, Allah hastens to satisfy my desires. So he had me divorce my adopted son and marry his ex-wife. And Allah knows best.
I find your lack of morality disturbing.
What would you know? You only have to obey Emperor Palpatine. I have to obey Allah. Not that they're really that much different. Besides, you told me you cut off your own son's hand. I only cut off the hands of my enemies.
There's a quick part in there about Islamic punishment for cutting off hands of enemies. Before we get into the sort of emotional Vader part, do you want to say anything about that?
Well, I see you have your Quran there. I would say the 33rd chapter is the verse 33rd. Although it probably came up on the screen, the 4th verse of the 33rd Surah Al-Ahzab should have it there. At least the part about your sons are not your sons, your adopted sons are not your actual sons, something to that effect. Which is one of these verses in need of explanation. Although I myself have serious doubts about the explanations that the Orthodox Islamic literature has provided. Not that I can provide a definitive alternative, but nonetheless, my default position is skepticism, and I say that with all due respect to my Muslim friends.
Well, let's see what our good friend Yusuf Ali says. He says, translates it this way: "Call them by the names of their fathers. That is juster in the sight of Allah. But if ye know not their fathers' names, call them your brothers in faith, or your malwas. But there is no blame on ye if ye make a mistake therein. What counts is the intention of your hearts, and Allah is oft-forgiving, most merciful." Now he has 2 explanatory notes which I'll read. "Freedmen were often called after their master's name as the son of so-and-so when they were slaves. Perhaps their father's names were lost altogether. It is more correct to speak of them as the mawla of so-and-so, but mawla in Arabic might also imply a close relationship or friendship. In that case, too, it is better to use the right term instead of the term son. Brother is not objectionable because brotherhood is used in a wider sense than fatherhood and is not likely to be misunderstood. What is aimed at is to destroy the superstition of erecting false relationships to the detriment or loss of true blood relations. It is not intended to penalize an unintentional slip in the matter, and indeed, even if a man deliberately calls another his son or father, who is not his son or father, out of politeness or affections, Allah is oft-forgiving, most merciful. It is the action of mischievous parties which is chiefly reprehended, if they intend false insinuations. A mere mistake on their part does not matter." Comments, Abu?
Honestly, I've never seen those comments from Yusuf Ali. Is this Yusuf Ali you're reading here, or is this like Hilali Khan?
No, that was Yusuf Ali.
I am Yusuf Ali. Where my mind wandered was back to what we were talking about with conversion, the process of conversion, bringing you into a lineage. With the Palpatine becoming a Skywalker, or someone who doesn't descend from Abraham becoming a son of Abraham through Christ. And it's funny, what you just read seems to fly in the face of that. It felt like the polar opposite. That's where my mind was wandering as I was listening to that.
Real quick, I'm going to read from something called the Authentic Quran. Now, this is by a Christian, a Christian apologist named Little Jacob from California. I've met the man, I know who he is, and I know other people who are involved in this project who are trustworthy. I always like to go here to compare it to Yusuf Ali. It's almost like a barometer between 2 polar opposites. And so here's what's said here. The translation reads, "Call them the adopted sons by their fathers' names. That is more just with Allah. If you do not know their fathers, So consider them your brothers in the religion, and your males. And there is no blame on you in what you sinned therein, but what your hearts intended, and God was most forgiving, most merciful. And here's the comment on 33:6, which is the next verse that's relevant. Muhammad used this verse as an excuse to take any woman he sees and desires from anyone. As such, he took his daughter-in-law and slept with her without any witness. See verses 36-37. It was made lawful to Muhammad that whenever he saw a woman and desired her, her husband must divorce her in order to make her lawful for Muhammad to have sex with her. Muhammad had more rights than any other Muslim. He had the right to take the food and water from the hungry and the thirsty. See Tafsir al-Qutri on verse 50. And real quick, verses 36-37 of the same chapter read as such. When a matter is decided by Allah and His Messenger, it is not befitting for believers, man or woman, to have a decision disobeying Allah and His Messenger. Such a believer has clearly gone astray. And behold, you said to one, Zayd, upon whom Allah bestowed favor and upon whom you bestowed a favor, keep your wife and fear Allah. And you hid in your heart what Allah was about to make known. And you feared the people, but Allah is the one who deserves to be feared. So when Zayd had accomplished his purpose with her, Zainab, we married her to you in order that there would be not shame upon the believers to marry the wives of their adopted sons when they accomplish their purpose with them, and the order of Allah was fulfilled. Now let me see if he has a comment on that real quick. Yes, he does. Muhammad had the right to make decisions on people's behalf, and should they disobey him, they would be considered to be disobeying Allah. Muhammad had been made one with Allah in making decision. This makes him a polytheist. The next verse says, Muhammad knew he committed a shameful act when he lusted and eventually slept with his adopted son's wife by causing them to divorce. To cover his tracks, he said that God gave him his son's wife. Muslims try to defend Muhammad's sinful act by saying that Allah asked Muhammad to marry this woman to annul adoption. See Quran 2:235. See also Understanding the Prophetical Biography by Sayyid ibn Ashur, page 126. Muhammad had seen Zainab bint Jahsh, his son's wife, naked, so he desired her, even though he told his son to keep his wife since he was trying to hide his lust for her. His son found out and decided to leave her so Muhammad could take her. Muhammad then claimed that it was Allah who gave her to him as a wife. See Tafsir al-Qutri and al-Tabakat al-Kubri by Ibn Said. As soon as she heard this news of Muhammad being permitted to marry his daughter-in-law, Aisha, Muhammad's youngest wife, said to him, quote, I see your God is always ready to satisfy your lust. Sahih al-Bukhari, volume 7, book 62, number 48, which you can find at sahih-bukhari.com. Okay, so now I know you probably don't. Well, we've already heard your perspective is a little bit different than that, but I did want to read that in relationship to that. But we got to keep it moving, baby. Here we go. Next line.
Yes, but these decisions now fill me with regret. After our last battle, I reconciled with my son Luke. I was even able to look upon him one last time with my own eyes. I admitted that he was right, and I confessed that I was wrong.
Wait, you did what now?
So there Vader is saying yes, but then he goes into this regret at the end of his life that you see in the remorseful Return of the Jedi final scenes. And Muhammad hears all that and says, you did what now? Because Vader said, I admitted I was wrong. So something I play upon when I see Muhammad's character, Abu, maybe you're different, is that Muhammad it seems like he can never really admit he was wrong. And there's great pride in him, I think. Now, that's my reading of his personality. Perhaps you have something different you would say. Can you hear me?
Well, it's certainly the Muslim view that I forget the verse. There's a verse that would go against this, but in the Quran. But there's nonetheless, it seems like the popular Muslim view is that Muhammad is essentially infallible. Not in the sense of him being God, but in the sense of just protected from making mistakes. So that anything he does is proper.
We might call that prophetic infallibility.
Yep.
And that's a
little play on the papal.
Yeah. Hey, man, you said it, I didn't. But then again, I did say it. All right, continue on. So that's what we're playing here right now. So Muhammad's going to become offended at Vader, basically telling him, you should also, admit that you made some mistakes and you were wrong. That's kind of what's going on here. So we zoom in on Vader's face, and Conman Mike added this wonderful little score that's sort of Star Wars-esque, but not where we're going to get a copyright strike. You know what I'm saying? And Muhammad's just totally out of it. He's like, "You did what now?" So let's see what happens.
You should do the same, Muhammad.
Admit that I've done something wrong?
Search your feelings. You know it to be true.
Never. I'll never admit that I'm wrong about anything.
I feel the conflict within you. Let go of your pride.
It's too late for me, Vader. No one tells me I'm wrong and lives!
You have underestimated the power of the Force.
Well, you have underestimated the power of Allahu Akbar!
Oh, that's my favorite part, the special effect where he draws the detonator box to him. I cannot tell you how many times it took us to get that take right. The way we did it was we threw it we threw it to David, and he had to catch it just right. And the way that we did it on my end was we threw it to me, but then we reversed it. At least I think that's how we did it. I totally forget now. Oh my gosh. I think what we did is we threw it to David. He had to catch it with the glove, but then we also threw it to me and then reversed it to pull it out of my hand. I think that's how we did it. Anyways, that's funny because, he stops him from blowing him up, at least the first time around. Did you enjoy this part, Abu?
Well, of course. I have a childlike joy for just about any instance where the Force is used to move objects. So, yeah, from that alone, I enjoyed it. And in this case, one that's used by Vader to prevent violence, which is rare. And I guess that's a reflection of the fact that, you guys are more fond of Vader than of the Orthodox depiction of Muhammad.
Oh, this guy. You're funny. Yeah, that's about right, though. All right, here we go.
Now your failure is complete.
Well, if I'm such a failure, then why did I remember to bring my backup detonator? Allahu Akbar!
Oh. Hold on, I gotta go back. So
Then why?
I love everything about this. The joy in Muhammad saying, he's got the backup detonator, and he pulls it out. And Vader's using a line he used against Luke in Return of the Jedi. Now Ben's failure. He's talking about in regards to Ben. Now his failure is complete. But then he blows him up, and it's so funny that they're on the Death Star because we just used the Death Star explosion in the Star Wars font. Everything about this is just insanely funny to me. I'm so sorry. I'm going to give you some final comments right here as I play this next little video clip one more time, but with the sound off. Abu, final comments on the Vader in the Boom Boom Room skit, my man.
I'm authentically speechless. I don't know. It was intense. It was entertaining and funny, and also a bit rough, I guess. I don't know. Forgive me. I don't know. As I said, I'm at a loss for words. But yes, it was certainly entertaining.
Rough? Do you mean we were hard on Muhammad? Is that what you mean by that?
Perhaps, but then again, I mean, I think the literature loans itself to some of these. This is a reflection of polemics that the literature seems to loan itself to at times, the extra canonic literature. And so, yeah, so I mean, it's a reflection of popular interpretations of that literature that float around the apologetics community. So it's also understandable. So not rough in that sense. In regards to some of what's typical within online Muslim Christian dialogue, I guess, although dialogue might not be the right word, but yeah.
All right, I got you. Well, so now what I'm doing is I'm playing bits from the Rise of Skywalker trailer, so we're kind of returning to that part of the show. I'm just playing it quietly in the background. I've got some parts from the trailer up, so we can kind of discuss everything else that we need to, with a little bit of aesthetic going on in the background, since I don't have a picture for you. But my face is on the screen too, so I'm sort of in the way. But anyways, with all that being said, we kind of covered a lot of ground. This is a kind of a fun little different type of apologetics thing. And you guys got to remember, everybody, that we have a saying here at Street Apologist Live, which is make apologetics fun again. And so that's kind of what's going on here. So with that being said, Abu, was there anything you remembered as we were discussing this, that you wanted to make sure we got to? You know what I mean? Was there anything that you kind of realized you didn't get to speak of or say in relationship to the Rise of Skywalker, or something in relationship to the discussion of Vader in the Boom Boom Room? Anything else, my man?
Well, one thing I've noticed is that I mean, just a little while ago, I cracked that joke about you guys liking Star Wars more than the Orthodox depiction of Muhammad. But I guess even I myself am somewhat guilty of this insofar that with Star Wars, I was looking for the parallels with Christianity. Yet in this discussion, I wasn't leaping to look for the parallels and Islamic parallels with Christianity. We seem to have only focused on the parts where it seems to diverge. At least, I don't know.
Right.
That was the thought that I was having. That the two approaches are somewhat rather different. They're diametrically opposed. My approach to Star Wars and this discussion on Islam. But oh well.
Shout out to Mr. Snuffleupagus Esquire for the super chat. Tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to be joined by Rick Caldwell and perhaps another guest, not sure, still working out the details on that, to discuss this recent situation that happened over Christmas between a Hebrew Israelite former NFL football player that resulted in arrest of two Hebrew Israelites who are both white. So it's going to be a fascinating discussion. Made USA Today. That's what we're going to be talking about tomorrow night. And then the next day after that, we're going to be covering the Santa Claus Boom Boom Room and probably get into some discussions about Christmas. And the day after that, we're going to be doing our book review where we discuss the John Frame Systematic Theology, chapter 29, where we discuss God's knowledge and man's knowledge. So you definitely need to catch up and read on that. Maybe Nate can drop the link in there. And then I haven't decided on what we're going to be doing on the 31st yet. But shout out, man, to everyone who jumped through. And guess what? I need to close this thing out with a freestyle. Abu, I think I'm gonna try to freestyle about Star Wars. How's that sound?
I think that's the way to go.
All right, you are exactly right. All right, so let me play this beat. It's time to do it, ladies and gentlemen. Switching over. Gotta turn this joint up here a little bit. Gotta turn this thing up. And Abu, if you could just mute yourself on this spot. But you're allowed to hang out. It's up to you what you want to do. And let me turn up this beat a little bit, provided by Justin Martyr. Yeah, pretty dope beat right there. Turn this joint up, all right, getting into it. Yeah, bring it. Now I rap, don't sing it. I got a lightsaber, you know I fling it. Yeah, I got to bring it, take it through the ringer. Vocab alone, people out Italian got a pinky. Ring on my finger, eat some cannoli. Chop down devils like Kenobi. Obi-Wan, we won. Freestyling, for fun. We've just begun. Red rum. Peep it out now, praise through the sun. Hands to the spirit in the ear so you hear it. Got this mic, brand new, not a clearance. Yes, for all of America. Shout out to boys named Erica and Erica. No matter who you are. Johnson ruined him, but JJ was pursuing him. By him some redemption. Peep out so there's some exemption for the mistakes and flaws. Yes, y'all, one day we'll do a boom with claws. Yeah. In a minute, grab the mic, begin to spin it. It's coming back. I got the black jacket, got to wrap it. Give me your machete. Don't lack it, the Bible scripts. Not a gangster, don't set trip. Spit the hotness from the lip. Like Ray, I do a flip over a TIE fighter. Be a lighter. Peep it out now before my cipher. Yes, sir, but not on board.
was Christmas dinner. Original trilogy, that's the winner. Eat too much, won't get no dinner. Gotta get fatter. Read the next chapter of the Star Wars saga. Stay away from lava, like Anakin, because then you'll have to say I'm your father in Empire. Don't be like Obi-Wan and be a liar. Yo, man, but it's Lucas's fault. All these movies made for kids or adults. That's the question. Now I'm stressing. Vocab alone, not like an X-Men. Yeah, like the trilogy. There's three, so that's like the Trinity. But it's not really very holy. My favorite character, you know, Obi. Obi was the saver, maybe even Vader. Show is over, so we say see you later. Yes, indeed, not a space invader, but a Star Warrior. So he hates us. That's called fan service. And that's the end. Don't get nervous. Peace out, y'all. Shalom. Vocab alone. Make apologetics fun again. Street Apologies live. May the force be with you.